What's going on, everybody? I am Brian DeCourty, hosting Bogey Free tonight, brought to you by FTNBets.com. And I am joined by Alex Blickel. What is going on, Alex?
Not a whole lot. It's sort of a weird time for golf right now, right? I think it's weird to have a standard PGA Tour event, and yet it almost feels like that's not what we should be talking about. We should be talking about all this live stuff. So it's weird.
It's the PGA. I gotta wonder what John Deere's thinking. Like they get to move back a week for once, not butt it up against the British Open, and still everybody bails because they're just gonna go to Europe anyway a week early, probably for the Scottish Open, which is now a PGA Tour event.
Mm-hmm.
Their feel, and then Berger. I mean, Lord knows when these guys might have not planned on playing this for weeks, but you have Berger in it like on Friday, and now he's not. Like you lose that. You got Webb Simpson and Adam Hadwin as your headliners this week. Meanwhile, like you said, Liv is kicking off their second event. They've pulled more names, albeit guys who are continuing to struggling, but they're names. They're big names. They're popular golfers, right? Like we saw what these guys were in the PIP. Like the casual fans don't necessarily care or know how bad these guys are playing. And then you have the Irish Open going on, which, isn't the deepest of fields either, but, people love, it's that first linksy vibe as we lead into the Open. And we have the John Deere Classic kind of just sitting here in Silvis, Illinois, middle of the country. Like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of the birdie fests. I like it more challenging. I feel like I've been far more successful in the challenging weeks, so it just makes me even less enthused for this event. It's not just the weak field. I just don't love this event.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because, I guess as a bettor and a DFS player, I don't particularly care for these weeks. As a fan, they're still okay. Like I don't mind the different setups. I don't need a U.S. Open every week. I don't necessarily need PGA National toughness, but it makes things a little more difficult with the added bit. Like you take away hard courses and you take away the skill gap, and it just shrinks to a point where not any of these 150 golfers, but a large majority of them are good enough to have their best at this particular course and be good enough to beat anybody else. Whereas you put them on these harder courses and skill starts to separate. And I think that's why you have guys over the years like a Brooks Koepka, particularly, or even Will Zalatoris now, where they just continue to show up in majors, but you don't necessarily hear from them in the other regular events, and their style of game just doesn't separate them as much. And they're just so much better and consistently better that it just shows on more difficult courses, and it makes it harder for us to project.
Yeah, and that shows up in the course fit model too, because when I'm looking at the course fit expected strokes gained for this week, there's just not a whole lot of separation between guys, and certainly that's in large part just because of this field. Like the best player in the field is Webb Simpson this week, but it's also just most weeks the guy who's near the top in course fit expected strokes gained might be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 strokes. This week it's Webb at 1.3, and there's like we said, there's just not a ton of separation. And in fact, when you get below Webb and Adam Hadwin, it's price almost doesn't even matter from the low 7,000s up to $10,000. The projections just there are guys in the mid 0.6s, sort of in the 7,600 to 8,400 range. That's better than the guys who are around 10,000 of those top two. So it's just kind of weird. And I think, on the one hand, you would think, hey, maybe that means that we can get some long shots at some really good numbers this week. But then you go to the odds board, and it's I forget who made the comment. I think it was Chris Meany in our chat, who was like, I've never seen so many average players 40-1. It's that's exactly my feeling. It's all these guys that I sort of had this inclination to, check their number and to maybe make a bet and to be excited to possibly bet them, thinking I might get a number between 60 and 80 and it's 35 or 40, or I think I might get 120 and it's 85. And so it's just man, there's just nothing really that's getting me enthused about this event. So it's tough. I do think from a DraftKings standpoint, there are some plays that I really like. And the using Matt's volatility report, I think there's certainly an edge to be had in DraftKings just from a betting standpoint. I have no bets this week. I have no outrights. Maybe my plan is going to be to kind of like find something live and maybe look for certain guys, particularly guys like I think one thing we've seen this year is odds are a little bit too quick to get really inflated on certain guys. Like I forget the first one I think was Scotty at Bay Hill. I know a lot of guys hit him at like 150 or 120 to 1, something like that live. And then JT at the PGA Championship. It's sort of been this running theme. And I've come close in the last couple of weeks doing exactly that with some live guys like Keith Mitchell, I think in the RBC Canadian. He sort of inexplicably went to like 150 to 1 at one point, even though he was playing pretty well. And it was just like he was 1 over through 3 holes or something like that on the more difficult side. By the end of the day, he was 25 to 1 or something like that. So maybe that's going to be my plan this week, just kind of save all my bullets for the live stuff. Yeah, it's just like it's not that thrilling of a week.
No, I have Webb Simpson as the best golfer in the field. I say that loosely. Him and Hadwin are pretty close, but neither of them I have as more than a stroke better, like just pre-rating, than an average tour field or an average golfer. I think I have Webb at 24 to 1 as the favorite, and I know when I run these fields, I run a very basic one on the Saturday night, Sunday before odds come out, and I knew for a fact when I looked at this, I was like, okay, well, this means I'm probably not going to bet a single golfer inside of 50 to 1 because they're just going to be 30s because the book's going to start somebody lower. And they don't have to. Sometimes, like I see European events occasionally start with guys like 16 to 18. But yeah, there really wasn't much for me either. Like if you see my card, I started with an 80 to 1. I bet 150 to 1. And I bet a 300 to 1 golfer, and I don't think they're not massive. They're not massive edges for me. They were edges. I wouldn't bet anything that I didn't necessarily believe in just to make it, but it's very rare that I bet this many on a card to begin with, let alone the whole card. So it's just, like you said, it's one of those weird weeks where we'll see what happens. What happens live. Like I'm really hoping I can get one of these guys just kind of give a little sweat here come Sunday, but the confidence isn't very high starting a card at 80 to 1. So yeah.
That's sort of an interesting discussion point too, because I feel like, a lot of our listeners particularly probably they don't bet each week, just to make money, but they do it because it's fun and to have that sweat. And so it's always interesting because I feel like I find the most value on outrights at higher numbers, like somebody who I might have at 80 and I can get them at 120, whereas you're not going to get that same edge from a percentage perspective from somebody who maybe you view as like he should be 18 and instead he's 24 or whatever, something like that. So it's weird because there's this dynamic where you become far less likely to have that fun sweat if you're betting at the high number. So it's, but it might be where the most value is. So it's just like this weird dynamic where if you're just betting for fun, maybe you want the lower numbers. And so this week just becomes like even less intriguing then because that's where the value is absolutely worse this week.
Yeah, like I said, starting a card at 80 to 1. And I know you said you didn't have any outrights yet, so I'll just jump into mine real quick. And quite honestly, there really isn't a lot of breakdown either because they're golfers who really haven't been playing all that well. And it's a product of more of a long-term, I'd say, talent or skill rating in this field. So like Taylor Pendrith is where I started at 80 to 1. We haven't even seen him play since the Players. But all you really need to know, I look at this course and I went more towards the distance or accuracy and or both. Like I found the driving to be, you got to pick one and you could still have an advantage over the field because one, distance is almost always an advantage. That's no different here in my opinion from what I've seen. And then the fairways, it's so easy to hit these greens, and especially from the fairway. It was one of the higher green regulations from fairways that the rough itself isn't overly penal, but you are missing birdie opportunities because of how easy this course plays. When you're in the rough, you are just not going to be able to set yourself up as much for these putts that you are going to need to hit on one of the easiest courses they play. So Pendrith, very long off the tee, and I asked you, I believe, in the chat what his accuracy was in the strokes gained, and it was above average. It was above 0. So that was promising too for as long as he hits it. It's about all he does kind of well. His irons are hit and miss. It was around, like, we've seen it though. It's not literally like all negative, but he's pretty much a driver of the ball. But again, in this field, I think I had him closer to 55 to 1. If assuming healthy, I'm assuming he's healthy. That's why he's back. He withdrew a couple weeks ago from the Canadian Open. I'm sure he really wanted to play that. So if he didn't force that, I feel comfortable if he's teeing it off, and that's all I can know, right? Like, I just have nothing else to go off of. So that's what I assume with Taylor Pendrith. But I did ask you about him specifically because of his length. I was curious how accurate he also is.
Yeah, it's he's yet another example of why I think it's so important that we were able to isolate the two components of driving into the distance and the accuracy categories, where they're independent of one another, very much unlike the traditional percent of fairways hit measurement for driving accuracy. And yeah, he's great off the tee, and I mean he really is like one of the best off the tee in the world. Gaining 0.43 per round with distance alone, and then 0.15 with accuracy. And just to put some context on that, like, that's nearly as accurate as Brendan Todd for his baseline. Brendan Todd's at 0.17. Lucas Glover is at 0.17. So he really is quite accurate off the tee. Certainly a strength of his game, and he does project quite well for me too. I would say close to pulling the trigger on that number. I do really like it for him. I figured like the uncertainty was just enough for that to go out of value for me. But I was close on that, and I think if I had no concerns about the fact that he hasn't played in so long and why hasn't he been playing, is he fully healthy, I think he would have been a bet for me at this number. I'm a little bit surprised that, I think a lot of the time when someone hasn't played for this long, their odds end up like super inflated, and I always want to buy those opportunities. So I was a little bit surprised that we didn't get that on him this week.
Yeah, I agree. And this is something I've done often, so I just continue to do it, where I've kind of just picked this idea that, like, unless I hear from the golfer himself that he's not ready, then I will assume they are. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it does not. But I'm assuming 148 other golfers are okay too, because most of them don't speak to any media. They don't tweet. So I know it's a little different because we have context with Pendrith, but again, if guys tee it up, I assume that they are good to go. And like I said, sometimes they are, sometimes we don't know. Maybe he just plays bad, even though he is good to go. That's the risk. It's one outright. Luckily at 80 to 1, it's not. I mean, that's why I'm not dropping 10-unit bombs on outrights. So, so that brings me to my next guy too, is just another guy off the tee, stupendous off the tee, literally pretty well negative everything else. And that's Hayden Buckley at 150 to 1. I was looking for a better each way on him just in case, but I couldn't find it. So I just went with 150 to 1. I don't feel great about it because he's kind of a one-trick pony with just gaining off the tee, although he habitually gains off the tee. He's not super short. He does a lot of it by hitting more fairways in the field. Again, this was purely a numbers thing, and so was the last one, which was Satoshi Kodaira at 300 to 1, which I have an each way on. And this made me double check my numbers. I was afraid that something was broke because he's been bad. Quite simply, he's just been bad. The only takeaway I had was that the last time he played a really weak field, which was the Mexico Open, he finished T15, although I'm not really sure if that course correlates to this at all. He hits a lot of fairways, so he's going to have to go the Brendan Todd route. Again, at 300 to 1, I think I had him, 170, 180. I don't know. The bottom of this field is just so bad to me and how I rate golfers that it just propped some of these guys up who aren't particularly good either. But again, at 300 to 1, I'm hardly risking anything for the return. So I bet the edge that was there, and that is that.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with any of those bets. I kind of like them, and I sort of like the fact that you almost maybe have some correlation between those bets, like
Oh yeah,
definite emphasis on off the tee play overall, but particularly driving accuracy. Those last two, Hayden Buckley is actually tops in this field in our strokes gained driving accuracy baseline projection. So
awesome.
a
Yeah,
big fan of his, and it'll be really interesting to see because when you're as accurate as he is off the tee, you give yourself such an opportunity to be good with your irons and to game with your irons.
exactly.
And so, it, and the other thing is like there seems to be a bit of a correlation between driving accuracy and iron play. Like it's much more common that we see somebody who gains a lot through distance off the tee to be poor with their irons than somebody who gains a lot with accuracy off the tee to be poor with their irons. So I would almost say, like, if the trend throughout the rest of the tour is any indication, maybe we should expect Buckley to be a better iron player than he's shown to this point in his career. So I definitely like the idea of buying low on him. Maybe he's somebody that I will look to kind of like see if he gets off to a good start and the odds don't adjust, and maybe I want to throw an early bullet at him live this week. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got as far as like my betting thoughts go this week. I do think it's worth noting that this course fit model maybe is a little bit different than what we expect from a typical Birdie Fest. The one thing that's perfectly in line with what we expect from Birdie Fest is iron play is enhanced quite a bit here. Over 40% of the predictive weight going to strokes gained approach this week. The two biggest surprises, I think, are that distance outweighs accuracy off the tee in the course fit model. Both are relatively in line with their tour averages, but typically on Birdie Fest, you see less distance, more predictive value to accuracy off the tee. And then the big surprise to me is that putting is very much downgraded this week. I know Josh found the same thing in his analysis, and like he even talked about it as sort of a surprise that he wasn't expecting to find in his analysis. And perhaps like the weirdest thing about it is that strokes gained around the green is also predictive here. So typically Birdie Fest, and like we know at this course that both fairways hit and greens in regulation hit are going to be well above average, or well above tour average. So the fact that around the green is very predictive makes me think it's not predictive because you have to save par when you've missed the green, but I'm guessing it's predictive because a lot of the par fives, maybe even the shorter par fours, it's your short game having to convert the up and down opportunities for birdies as opposed to saving pars, like we often see on a week where around the green is quite predictive. So,
Yeah.
certainly some differences and some things that we can lean into from a course fit model perspective to give us an edge this week, but it's still the John Deere, and historically this has not been one of my better events because I typically don't do as well in Birdie Fest.
So two things on that. So the around the green one is interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned like the par fives and the shorter par fours, because if you look, remember when Bryson broke strokes gained in Detroit, like around the green is 50 yards and in compared
Mhm.
around the PGA Tour, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure it's
I think
50
it's
yards.
40, but it's
40.
something like
Okay,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, either way.
So it's not just like people picture around the green like they're chipping from a couple of yards.
Mhm.
So like yeah, like you mentioned, if you're driving um, these shorter par fours, you're getting within that window by chance, or on the par fives in particular. Yes, that can drive that for sure. And then as far as the putting goes, I know I had mentioned before, I think it was TPC Craig Ranch. I'd like to target guys who do putt well, although I didn't particularly do that with these wagers. That is included in the model, but sometimes the number is the number. But just because I feel like when scoring's there, you need to capitalize, even though we did see Lucas Glover win
Mhm.
last year. Not a historically great putter, but putted. I think he had one of the worst performances putting from a victor at this
Mhm.
tournament in a little bit that we had strokes gain data for. But I guess my point is, I went and looked at the PGA Tour as a whole. I finally did a very basic strokes gained total, and I looked at it on what I would consider easier scoring venues below par at field averages versus more difficult ones, which is above par. And names that popped up that gained less strokes on easier courses were guys like Zalatoris and Brooks
Mhm.
Koepka. And I kind of mentioned them earlier, and they did a lot of it. They were losing strokes putting.
Yep.
again, that doesn't necessarily correlate to any one particular event. I'd never actually looked into my theory of do good putters perform potentially better in these situations. I mean, they still have to give themselves birdie looks. Like, I mean, obviously, if Denny McCarthy is here, but he's not giving himself enough looks, it doesn't matter. So that's part of it too, obviously. But I did find it interesting that a lot of guys who were better putters outperformed their baseline on easy courses compared to those guys who show up at US Opens and are just super consistent golfers, which is a skill. Consistency separates the best in the world. They can all hit dimes from 125 yards. It's just one guy does it repeatedly more and doesn't make doubles and triples. It just, a lot of those guys perform worse to their baseline at courses like Deere Run.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense from just like a frequency perspective too. So if you can really think about this when thinking about short games and somebody like Victor Hovland, on a course like this, you're just not going to have as many chip shots from around the green because you're not missing greens. So of course when around the green play isn't predictive at a birdie fest, it's very easily explained by the fact that it doesn't matter if you're losing 0.1 strokes per around the green shot if you only hit 3 of those per day or 3 or 4 of those per day. And the same sort of idea can be applied to putting. Like somebody like Zalatoris, in a standard round on a difficult course, maybe he has 8 putts between 6 and 12 feet. And maybe on an easier course, he's going to average something like 10 to 12 putts from that range. And so, if he's losing the same amount per stroke, but he has 3 or 4 more strokes from that distance, of course, he's going to lose more. So I think like that, we always talk about it. It's really nice when the theoretical like exploration of an idea shows up and aligns perfectly with what we can observe in the data. And I think that's one of like the really easy ones, that it makes a whole lot of sense that on birdie fests, you have to be a better putter.
Right. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to look into it because I've never actually looked into that theory. I may dig into it a little more at some point in the future if I have some time as well. But obviously on a week like this, I figured, this could be the time just to see if I started with the baseline strokes gained total just to see, because if that didn't pan out, then there was no point in going any further on that. So
yeah, I wanted to get to a point where I can include the birdie rate over expectation data into the course fit model to see where that may be predictive. And I think we would find that birdie over expectation may actually be more predictive of success in more difficult events. Like I know we've talked about the fact that Luke List in particular, like his birdie rate over expectation really seems to pop on the more difficult courses. Like I think it was Muirfield. When Horschel won, he had 15 birdies that week. Luke List finished like 26th or something and had 18 birdies that week. Yeah. Like he makes a ton of birdies in hard courses, and then he gets to these easy courses where he's such a terrible putter and he doesn't make a ton of birdies because he's left with the 8-footers that he has to make over and over and over, and he misses a ton of them. So it'll be really interesting to see if I can get to that point. As of now, I just have it as a predictive metric instead of a historical metric. So I need to have both to include it in the course fit model. But hopefully we'll be able to introduce that soon. And I think that will put a little wrinkle into these events as well.
Right. So yeah, with that, we will get out of your hair. Thank you for joining us once again. Bogey free, brought to you by FTNBets.com. Head on over. If you're not a subscriber yet, you can use promo code AXIS to get 20% off, gain access to all of our material behind the paywall. I have picks in there for the Irish Open, like I mentioned as well, and some other props that we don't talk about on this show. And then you might as well go over to FTNDaily.com and do the same and get all of the tools that Alex has been talking about and links to those. They are incredibly helpful for building lineups, and you can bet with them as well. I find them helpful for both making tweaks. So we hope to see you there. And thanks for joining us today.